In the course guide I've created for this class, there's a tab for evaluating your sources. And under that tab, we have three different things that are highlighted here. There is a stoplight evaluation, which talks about very top level source evaluation, which generally acceptable, which would be green light, which can go either way, which is yellow light, and then which is generally not acceptable, which is red light. We all know the symbolism of the green, the yellow, the red. But it talks about, gives examples of different sources and then reasons why. So red light, Wikipedia, commercial websites, websites whose authorship cannot be verified, ads and things like that. Generally not acceptable for academic purposes. They either don't have an author or they have a lay author, which means a non-expert, and generally use casual language. A caveat here about Wikipedia. Wikipedia catches a lot of grief from people, and the general wisdom is that you don't use it as a source. And that's true. You would not use Wikipedia as a source in your paper. But that's because Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, and you generally don't use encyclopedias as sources anyway. The purpose of an encyclopedia is to provide very basic, factual, straightforward information. So if you're embarking on a topic and you're going through that exploration phase, going to something like Wikipedia or another or print, encyclopedia is a perfectly fine way to start. And in fact, I would recommend Wikipedia over the print, because at least Wikipedia can be updated in real time and your print encyclopedia may be 30 years old and completely worthless. So Wikipedia is a fine source if it's used appropriately in the correct context. And the correct context is, starting off your research, familiarizing yourself with the topic and the different concepts that fall under the topic. And then, you can look at the sources that they provide and the references at the end and see if there's anything there that you can use as a source. But just to clarify, the Wikipedia itself is not inherently bad or evil. It's just, there's an appropriate use for it. Yellow light, this is kind of something that is dictated by the assignment that you're working on. What is allowed for the assignment. So things like television or radio broadcasts, newspapers and popular magazines, opinion, point of view websites, online communities, popular books, top Google Scholar results. Proceed with caution. Acceptable depending on the purpose or the assignment. Potentially they use a combination of casual and academic language. The authorship may be a lay author or it could be a subject matter expert. For this assignment, you are required to have, I think, 4 items for your annotated bibliography, and at least 2 of them have to be peer-reviewed. So you could use something like newspaper or popular magazine or opinion or point of view websites. Now, opinion, we're going to talk about a little bit about bias. If a source is biased, that does not mean that it is necessarily bad. You're writing a persuasive paper, so your paper will have an inherent bias to it as well. Bias is not inherently bad. It's just a matter of how you contextualize it in the paper. You would not present opinion as fact. And that's kind of the important distinction here, is that what we're dealing with are opinions and commentary and analysis, and should be treated as such and not treated as fact. So that's just the kind of thing to keep in mind when you're talking about opinion, point of view pieces. Bias is not inherently a bad thing. It's all in how you use it and whether or not it's appropriate to use. And then green light, these are things that are pretty much always successful or acceptable in the academic context. So articles that you find in the library's databases, scholarly journals, official government reports, authenticated government documents, edited books from scholarly publishing houses, things like, University of Chicago Press, things like that, Oxford University Press, those are going to be scholarly publishing houses. So green, Green light, go ahead and use, authors or experts, and use of academic language specific to the subject matter. So again, the Stoplight Evaluation, which was developed by a couple of my colleagues who are no longer at USC Aiken several years ago. But this is a good kind of very quick, is this going to be appropriate or not? This next tab here is, I'm not going to show a video in a video. So when you're in the course guide, you can watch this short, like 3.5-minute video that talks about the difference between peer-reviewed sources and popular sources, like magazines and newspaper articles. So this is a very good, well done video that you have available to you. And then we have the PATS evaluation tool. PATS stands for Purpose, Authority, Timeliness, and Scope. Basically what these are some different criteria that you can look at while you're trying to decide whether or not something will be useful to you as a source. And some questions here to ask yourself. So under purpose, why was this source created? Was this created to inform or educate? Was it created to entertain? Was it created to mislead? Was it created to sell you something? Was it created to incite civil unrest, right? What was the purpose for it? What audience was it created for? Was it created for just a general lay audience? Was it created for other subject matter experts or even students, other scholars, right? What kind of audience? And then is it scholarly or popular? And then I ask the question here, does it matter? When I ask does it matter, I mean, does it matter in the context of the assignment? Are you limited to only peer-reviewed? Or are you limited to a certain number of non-peer-reviewed? So asking yourself, is this scholarly or popular, is going to be an important part of that evaluation process. Authority talks about who created the information. Who is the author? Is it a person? Is it a corporation? What are the author's qualifications or credentials for writing on this subject? As far as a person or corporation, you may run across studies that were funded by, let's say, studies on global warming funded by ExxonMobil. That is an important distinction to make. That's an important detail to pay attention to because they have a vested interest in research data turning out a certain way. So looking at who the author is it a person or a corporation, right? And what are their qualifications? The person may have a PhD, but if it's a PhD in divinity, that's not guaranteeing that they're going to be knowledgeable at all in chemistry. Okay, so who is the author? Is it a person or corporation? What are their potential conflicts of interest? But then what are the author's qualifications for writing on the subject? Timeliness, is there a date? When was the content last updated? For this assignment, your professor doesn't want you to go further back than 10 years, so paying attention to date is going to be necessary. If you're looking at a website that looks like it was built in 1998 with like a black background and sparkly purple stars and there's no title or there's no author, probably don't use that website. That's not going to be very useful to you, and at the very least, that information is out of date. So paying attention to timeliness will be important. And then scope, does it give too much information or too little? Sometimes you'll be looking at a peer-reviewed research article and it seems like it's what you need, but at the same time, the information is so complex and the whole thing is very much geared towards other experts in that field. That may or may not be the most or the easiest thing for you to use. So you might have to move on to something else. So does it give too much information or too little? And how specific is the information provided? So looking at the PATS evaluation, if you ask yourself these questions, there's no objectively right or wrong answers. But once you answer these questions, that will help you kind of figure out, does this fit with what I'm trying to do or does it not? So again, when you're searching for information online, even in the databases, it's useful to apply the PATS evaluation tool. If for no other reason, to say, what is this? How does this fit in my research? How would I use this? So we have these things available like, you know, covered here in the middle. But then on the right hand side, you'll see that the PDFs are available, including an alternative to PATS, which is CRAP. Currency, reliability, authority. Let me click that. Currency, relevance, excuse me, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So there's also the CRAP tool, which is basically the same points as PATS. And that's the source evaluation thing with a nice iceberg image as well. Again, if you run into questions, if you run into a source that you want to use but you're not sure if it's acceptable, you can always run it by your professor, or you can reach out to me. Or if you have any other questions about source evaluation, again, let me know and we'll see if we can help you.